welcome to a new edition of Right Aligned. I have Lee with me, Lee Davis from Peter and Paul. You are the strategy director, is that correct, Lee?
Creative director, strategy director. Because we're only small, it bleeds one from the other quite a lot. So it's creative director really, but you're much more likely to see me at a sort of client workshop than a photo shoot. So it's more like a bit of the earlier stage, which direction we're taking.
Yeah, I think a lot of studios have those. When you're not sort of super huge, there's always going to be a bit of a crossover, isn't there?
Yeah.
People getting stuck into different things. We are talking today about dealing with client rejection. So it's the first time we've stepped into this one. I think it's something that is really important because I don't think it's spoken about much, or I don't see it spoken about or written about much. But I think it's something that we all have faced or will face throughout careers, and probably quite a lot. If it's anything like myself, dealt with a lot of these things privately, and which isn't always the best way to go about it, because it can lead to many of the issues. We start to worry about things and start to sort of feel like you're not good enough, and you sort of slip into a funny old world. So I think opening up the conversation publicly and bringing people in, such as Lee, to sort of discuss it from his perspective, should hopefully be really interesting and really allow people to understand the opinions and the positions that other people have been put in. As usual with our talks, we really try and encourage you guys that are listening. I know we've only got 4 on live at the moment, but just to maybe add some comments into the chat, or even any experiences that you've had, because I think it's really good for us to have more of a community aspect to these conversations, just to bounce ideas and sort of hear the opinions of everybody that's in on the call. I know we've just done a little bit of a short introduction there, Lee, to what you currently do, but would it be possible to maybe rewind a little bit, just to give us a sort of outline history of your time in design?
Yeah, so I grew up in a little town in Cheshire called Middlewich, which didn't have much culture, absolutely no design, had a canal, lots of canal barges. So there's quite a lot of ornamental painting going on. And then I studied graphic design really early after school at our local art college. And then went on to go to university in Bristol, and then graduated 20 years ago, which is a bit scary. And started work. My first job was at this agency in Nottingham, which doesn't exist anymore, called Purple Circle, which was really great, actually. A really brilliant way to start, just because they had something really good going on there, which was like an insane amount of trust to a junior that I was at the time. And yeah, just then ended up from there after about a year, got a job in Sheffield at a company that doesn't exist anymore, or has been bought, but it was down the road from where we are now. And in that job met Peter and Paul. And then after a little stint in Manchester, started at Peter and Paul 16 years ago. So I've been doing this now for nearly 20 years, which is a bit scary.
Where does that time?
Yeah, so it's it's kind of, like rising through the ranks, I suppose, is the awful way of putting it, that from being a junior designer to sort of middleweight senior, and then a kind of creative director. But like I say, us being, we're a team of about 16, about to take somebody else on. And it means that everybody in our company basically has to do quite a lot of roles, because although it's creative direction, strategy does have a lot to do with that. Copy is quite a big part of what I do, and also just being a designer. So I'm not off the tools. A lot of creative directors are off the tools, but I'm certainly not. So yeah, that's it.
You got to stay in
the history in 5 minutes.
Yeah. No, I think it's just always good to have that context of who's on these calls. I think it really helps. And I think for what we're going to be talking about, you probably would have experienced this rejection or dealing with clients in different ways throughout, from every stage of that career. It'd be sort of, the more responsibility you take, the more you have to sort of maybe take the brunt a bit more. Now, like I say at the start, this conversation came about because I saw Lee had posted, I think it was on Twitter at the time, wasn't it? I think about this subject, and that's the reason why I reached out. And I think it'd be good to maybe get a better understanding about where that tweet came from. Was it something that just happened? Is it something that you've been thinking about for a while? Was it sort of a bit of a shotgun?
Yeah, it's funny really, because obviously when you replied, it was like, oh God, I mean, have I really got a perspective on this? Because it was a bit knee-jerk, because we were doing an identity for something, that we'd done a bit more. It was sort of like 3/4 of the way there, and we'd done a bit more work in order to complete it, and it got knocked back. And I suppose it just made me think that being quite long in the tooth and having done this for ages, that when you do get your work knocked back, it's sort of, I'm not going to say it doesn't get any easier, because it kind of does, because you get used to it, but it still doesn't matter how much, like experience you've got, it's still annoying. And it's still, because there's a few things I think that go on at the same time. There's obviously the personal aspect, which you kind of get over time because you worry a bit less. There's the personal aspect of like, I've put myself into the work and it's got knocked back. I think when you're younger, that's a bigger thing. The other sort of thing that goes on at the same time is the sort of reality of, and this is probably, I'm a bit more aware of this now, being a bit more senior in the company. You've got your personal aspects of it, but the other side of it is how it impacts on the studio. So what I mean by that is, like when we go and pitch for a job or you try and win a new client, you have your 3-4 stage process or whatever. Every agency will have a different sort of version of it, where you'll go, this is when a project starts, you kick off, do your research, you come up with a direction, the design, blah, blah, blah. But in no point when you lay that out, there's no point in that timeline where you go, and this is the bit where you don't like everything and we have to start again. You know what I mean? We never say that. No one ever knows that. So when it happens, if it never happens, and you're making up for lost time then, aren't you? Because you're at a stage of the project that you've got to go backwards and go again. And for all that, obviously, we've got plenty of like, you wouldn't make good work, would you, if you didn't have a good, healthy approach to experimentation. But when you do get a knockback, it's how, I think there's this side of it, how it looks to the rest of your team. Do you know what I mean? What it's done to the process of the project, the time of the project, the budget attached. So there's a couple of things. There's like my work, my opinion, bit of me in it, and it's been binned. But then there's also that like kind of parallel that's like, how's this coming across in this studio? So that's probably what made me go, oh, never gets any easier, does it? I think that's all I was really saying. After all the time. And I suppose like there is that thing that when you see work out there and you try and compare your own work to it, I mean, we're no different. Everybody's showing their finished work, aren't they? They're not going, I can only think of like 1 or 2 occasions when there's a Michael Beirut book called How To, and he's quite honest about the process. That's a good book worth reading, actually, because it's very like, like when you read that book as a designer, you go, that it's very truthful, as in, you read it and sort of go, that feels like the world I'm in. So he's got a few projects in there where he'll show completely like pretty well-formed solutions that ended up getting canned. Because that is the reality. That is what happens, you know what I mean?
Quite funny, because we run a series of talks where we ask studios to come and share the step-by-step process of how they're created. Predominantly an identity, but it has been animation or typography in the past.
Yeah.
It seems to always be the case that the concepts that weren't selected are the ones that they love the most.
Yeah.
That get through, like, been watered down to a point where it's just it sort of teeters on the edge of commercially viable and successful and a little bit challenging or out there. But it always hits home how many times that things are suggested to clients and they seem to obviously have been rejected for the safer route a lot of the time. I think it's a funny one, isn't it? Because I think it's more of an educational process as I've gotten older to clients to sort of try and twist their arm a little bit into being a bit more bolder and braver.
I mean, I think sometimes clients are right. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, we're probably quite lucky as an agency because we don't really have, I think people are walking through the door to start off with us, knowing what we do.
Yeah.
So we're pretty lucky in comparison to other places that I've been, and like I've not been many actually, but we're pretty lucky in the sense that people come to us for a reason. And so we don't have a lot of that churn where we're like, oh, we must go for the safer option. So there's not really a lot of that, but I think that there is some different people are different, aren't they? So, some clients you really got to educate. And what's quite nice is people that we've worked with for a long time that might have started the process as maybe not being all that literate when it comes to graphics and visual identity and, just visually literate. that over time of working with us, they become more so.
Mm.
And sometimes what you might find, we've had something recently where we've had to present ourselves to like quite a financially driven fund. But one of the guys sort of like in the meeting has known us for a year and has been through the project process with us for a year. And we delivered a really great bit of work for him. And where he started a year ago was a bit like, well, I've never done this before, so I don't know what the bloody hell it's all about. But now, a year later, he's advising, these people in the fund that like, these are the guys to go with and kind of understands it. So there's loads to go, there's loads going on there that I don't think it's always clients not wanting to go for the bolder option. It's not always that. Sometimes it's us getting it wrong. Sometimes you've got to listen. And actually, I've seen times when the work's got better when you've responded to feedback and you've thought again. You've got to be open to that. At the same time, I think there are other times when you've got to be really nimble about pushing back the hardest thing to do is to push back and not sound like a massive diva. It's my work, and you know what I mean? Because as soon as you don't build a good relationship with the person you're doing the work for, so they've got to feel like if you are pushing back, you're pushing back in their best interests. And do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
not in your best interest.
Yeah, and I think that can be a big problem, can't it? Especially, I don't think it's exclusively to younger people or to freelancers, but sometimes they can be a bit, designing for themselves as opposed to the brief. But in a studio environment, when you've got a lot of people and you've got a process of, exploration, strategy, then design, concept, etc., you could normally weed out the things that might be pushed back on, can't you, through those steps. If you've got, from a studio perspective, because there's so much to sort of unpack in this conversation, from a studio perspective, you're mentioning there about the knock-on effect. Do you think there's too much pressure maybe on the timeframes being given to deliver? So if you've only got a month to do this part and then a month through that, it's quite rigid. If any part of that falls down, then it really is a knock-on effect to everybody, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that's like loads like, yeah, that is true. But sometimes that's coming from the client end at a point where they're briefing it in. Because with all our projects where it's like client's gone, there isn't much time to do this. So the pressure on our timeline is created by that. There's also the pressure in a studio environment about how many other projects you've got on as well. So, you're on a project at the moment that needs delivering for a presentation for a particular time because that the very next day you're picking something else up, and then the very next day you're picking something else up. So yeah, I found, and I don't know whether it's been any different in the years that I've worked, that I don't think timelines have got more compressed, actually. I just think they've always been pretty compressed. I do wonder whether at the client side that some clients might benefit from a bit more organized, like early briefing. We are doing a project at the minute which is not getting delivered until next spring, which does take the pressure off and does allow a bit more movement to because the next meeting that we have, the next presentation that we have, has not got to be absolutely nail on the head because we've got to go into production the following week. You know what I mean? There is time to kind of get a script. It's for an ad campaign, but there's time to get the script right. There's time to get the shot list right. So yeah, I think there's timelines are an issue, but maybe that's more of a sort of cultural thing about when things are briefed in, and that can go down to whether a client really values creativity in the work. You know what I mean? I think the clients that really do value our work and are really the clients that really know what they're after, by which I mean they're not asking, I want it green and I want it this font. They know they're coming to us because they know what we do and they trust that. They tend to have longer timelines, whereas some other industries, we work a lot in the built environment, so that is an industry that is very, very quick. You know what I mean? We need to get this building or this space needs to be marketed before it's even completed as a building. People need to get interested in it. And so you often find that the timelines are more compressed with projects like that.
But you noticed over the period that you've been at Peter and Paul, 16 years, that as the studio's grown, reputation grown, quality of work grown, and the team has expanded, that you then attract clients that maybe, because you just touched upon the idea of maybe not respecting creativity. Some people don't always sort of see it as as an essential. It's maybe just a bolt on. It's that old cliche of when the budgets get dropped.
Yeah.
Marketing and design seems to be the first thing to get sliced. Have you noticed that now you're more established, or you've got a clear idea of who you are, and people can see that from case studies and what you've got online and maybe word of mouth, that you then generate clients that maybe do have more trust and respect in design, because they know they're coming to an agency. They could maybe go somewhere cheaper or smaller, but they wouldn't, because they really care about what's going to be produced. As opposed to sometimes the opposite scale of that is, if you've just started out, you might need to be dipping your toes in the water with smaller clients, maybe just the founders of a one-man business, etc., and they just sort of see it as a throwaway commodity.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of shape of clients and the size of them has changed over the years. But then I wouldn't say we've actually got a piece of paper that goes, this is what we are as a brand, what we're all about. But we have got pretty good at, as we've got bigger and got a bit more grown up, we have got better at walking into meetings and almost being like, you need to be selecting us if this is what you need, if this is what you want, because that's where we prioritize the time, you know what I mean? And the cost is reflected in that. But we do get tons of work that's that's way too expensive. But and I wouldn't call us a massively expensive studio either, but we do get clients are, budgets are tight, aren't they? So clients are always trying to get more for their money. And I don't know whether that's any different across. We work mainly in 4 sectors. It's live entertainment, arts and culture, education, and the built environment. I wouldn't say that changes across them. Actually, I think every client is always looking to get the most out of the least budget, aren't they? So, yeah, I suppose what I mean is that we are in a position, we've almost built a portfolio which tells people that, you come to us if you want a good creative output. But earlier on, I don't know, when we were smaller, yeah, we were probably doing less profitable work, but you take a view, don't you, all the time, and we still do that now. We might do projects which we know are not going to make a huge amount of profit, but we think there's a good creative opportunity there, and that feeds what you might call the company's brand, doesn't it? It's more sort of energy and fuel to fuel this idea that what comes out of it always has to be good. We are lucky and we don't have any churn. So I think if you were newer to the industry or a freelancer or whatever, and you were working for somebody and you knew the budget wasn't massive, the next question you've got to ask yourself is, all right, the budget isn't massive, but is the work worth it? You know what I mean? Is it worth me overspending to get something that is a really good piece of work that feels like it reflects where I want to go? Because there's a quote in the I think it's Kessel's Kramer quote that's the work you do is the work you do. So if what you're doing is unprofitable work and the client's not interested, then you run the risk then of doing the next project is more unprofitable work with uninteresting client. You know what I mean? So you have to be quite strong to think about and knowing what you're going to get out of it beyond the budget.
Yeah, and you also think that projects such as those ones where what you've just mentioned, the budget might not be high, but the opportunity to create something different or unique or however it might look and feel could be quite re-energizing for the team, because if you have gone through a process and maybe a client something maybe turned sour or there was pushback and people like we were saying earlier, that knock-on effect, it's not just seeing it as maybe unprofitable but creative, it's unprofitable but maybe a good antidote for the team to sort of fall back on and express themselves creatively, which is what majority of people that are in that sort of junior midweight sort of role, that's what they just crave, that opportunity to express themselves.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, because there's loads of reasons why you might take on a project that's not got a huge budget attached to it. So one of them might be creative opportunity, another one might be PR opportunity. Does it move you into a new sector you've not worked in before? Is it going to be highly visible? Even though it's cheap. And I'm not saying you do get that. We don't really get this, but you get that sort of client story of oh, can you do this for cheap? It's going to help your visibility. I don't mean that, but things that we've done in new sectors, we've worked in the sort of food and drink sector, smaller projects, because we know we've got the opportunity there to create something that will go, because it's a bit shallow this, but I was taught to our lot, about, I always imagine our work as, would you show it? Like when you get to the end of it, would you be happy to show that, put it out in the world? And I think that's a bit of a benchmark really against, is the work good enough? Would I show it? Because if you're not going to show it, let's think again and do something a bit better. So yeah, cheaper projects. There's a few like different criteria, I think, for putting your energies into it. I think it does help all the team. Yeah, I mean, certainly the work that we've done, I wasn't involved actually, but the work that we've done in the beer category, which we'd never worked in before, it has been pretty hugely energizing for the people that have worked on it, because they've been able to pour themselves, no pun intended, pour themselves into something they really cared about because they were really into beer. Do you know what I mean? I'm not particularly. So, I think that, in fact, we were in discussions the other day about a project that came in that really, really good, but not the sort of project we would work on as a studio now. Maybe the sort of project we would have worked on 10 years ago. So it's a book project. So we used to do more of those years ago, and they're not huge sort of budgets, not huge money spinners. So we got into a big conversation about, do we take that project on? Is that going to be good in the development of one of our designers who's a bit younger, for them to kind of really improve in that style of work? So there's a few different sort of criteria when it comes to the size of jobs and what makes sense to take on. And being energized as a team is, yes, I think it is one of those.
Just thinking how you touched upon the beer project, and it's something that members of the team are interested in. Again, is that something that you think, trying to think about being proactive to prevent client rejection or limit it as much as possible? And working in areas that you are personally interested in, also that must be really helpful, because you have a bit of an understanding of the culture or the current landscape, the trends, etc. Is that something that you proactively do as a studio, or you think would be a valuable thing to do, is to find sectors and work with people that you, as a business, not everybody within the studio or within the business have the same interest, but there is a sort of common interest or shared values, whether it's ethical or sustainable, just a type of product you like. If by having that knowledge and that understanding and already sort of slightly invested in that it might be a specific brand or just a sector, that must help, because you sort of have a better knowledge or understanding of what it might be expecting because of the space that they're in.
Loads more accidental than that. Let's say it's loads more random, because I think the 4 sectors we work in, which are pretty set, are selected probably down to a number of years, contacts being built up, portfolio being built up, and also the skill that we've got. That we know the skills we've got in our team can deliver work in those sectors really, really well. Anything outside of that, it's not necessarily generated by each individual's interest, because it's that classic thing. And we tried to do this years and years ago. I'm aware that there's like somebody on the call that used to work at our agency years ago. So Heather, hello. She will know this. But years ago, we did have asking people, what would it be that you would like to work in? But I find that a really hard thing to answer, because I don't necessarily think, some of my favorite work, say, that I've done in this studio is not necessarily attached to sectors that I would have thought would have been my favorite work. Do you know what I mean? Be it like a charitable sector or things like that. And also ethically, I think that it's interesting, actually. I interviewed a sort of placement student recently who was really set, quite admirably so, really set on, I only want to do work. I want to do ethically sound work that aligned to my values, which is really commendable. But obviously I was kind of going, we don't go out to try and find unethical work. It's just that there will be time. If you worked in a studio like ours, there will be times when a brief will land on your table that you have to decide really just where is the line. It's not like we work for oil companies or tobacco companies, but there might be something that, especially in the built environment, say, there's loads of complexity to that, isn't there? About, just like you mentioned it before, gentrification of an area, and how ethically do you sit with that? So yeah, it's not necessarily. I think the key four sectors that we work in have been built on over time, and anything outside of that is just taking advantage of an opportunity, really, more so than it is interest from the team. But what you end up doing then is, if you've taken advantage of an opportunity and you know you've got members in the team who are most interested in that, then you absolutely pair those people with that work. Do you know what I mean? So our sort of middleweight designer, we know, has got a good interest in the world of art. So if we get a project that's in that sector, in that world, he's the ideal candidate for it. It just so happened that this beer project came out of, it came out of a sort of partnership that involved Pete. And then we knew that a couple of our designers were really into that world too. So yeah, it's like paired afterwards, I would say, rather than before.
Yeah, because I think it can be a little bit too idealistic to sort of say you're going to go and specifically conquer a certain industry. It's just a lot of the time it just falls on your lap, or a lot of hard work connecting and networking and just word of mouth. From thinking more about the specifics of dealing with clients, and not necessarily just the rejection, but maybe the way that they tone of voice that they use, or the way that they speak to the team, or sometimes it can. I've had it in the past myself where it can be, or Hal has broken loose, very reactive sort of commentary around things that it's sort of like, we will need to take a bit of a deep breath. Do you have a process in terms of when you're presenting work? Is it down to a senior level? Do the people that are involved in the project sort of, are they responsible for sort of presenting it to the client, no matter what sort of level they're at within the business?
Yeah, I used to work in an agency that, although I loved it dearly, my first job, the designers never went to presentations. And I always felt like that was really weird, especially in probably more the second agency I worked in. We had this situation where jobs would be taken away, creative would be taken to presentations by account managers. And then where they would return from meetings having signed up to and agreed to changes to the project, which were going, like that sort of house of cards thing, that as a piece of design you were taking away that bottom card, and everything was going to fall down if we were signing up to these changes. So yeah, everybody presents, everybody's in front of client. We also like to make sure designers are in front of client really early, and that they're contactable as well. Because if I could take one thing away about, like, what do you think, because I know you were saying this to me when we chatted a few months ago, that what are the little strategies to avoid a lot of rejection? I don't know about that really. Apart from the one key thing I would say is that, and this sounds like such a cliche, but getting a good relationship with the person you're working with on a sort of personal level is like such a great start to the work getting, because once you can get on a level with somebody that is clear that both parties, the design party and the client party, are just there to make good, effective piece of work, that's what we're all driving towards. And you just imagine that process as two people that know each other rather than two businesses. You know what I mean? I think you get closer to, we don't have a lot of work not back, actually. We're lucky like that. And I think one of the main reasons for that is our ability to put designers frontline, to get the conversation going with a client. So we've got account teams, of course, but I think that partnership between the account person and the designer, having a good relationship with the end client and the decision maker, for that to be the right person, it makes so much difference, actually. And even, we've had projects where this doesn't work for all clients, actually. Some of them are a bit more procedural than this, but we've had projects where we had one recently, as charitable project for the NHS. And our client, who we know really well, it was another one of them. It was like an insane deadline. So we showed them our first idea after one afternoon, like really not very mocked up, because we knew that she knew us. She knew that we could turn the work around to a high quality, even if what she was seeing was not the finished thing. And just being able to ring her, Zoom's a bit of a like love-hate thing, isn't it? But Zoom's really useful for that, to be able to go, I've got something, can I show it you before we go any further? Well, that just builds trust, doesn't it? And you do then, hopefully, you do prevent some of those, like, oh, we've got a timeline now that needs revising because it's been knocked back. So I think the one takeaway for me is if we can make that client relationship and you feel like it's just two parties trying to make a good, effective piece of work, I think you get yourself into a pretty good place then to not get it knocked back, really.
Yeah. And from that, I gather that transparency must be really important to students. If you're happy to share ideas, that sometimes as designers, we can be quite precious about wanting everything to be perfect before you show somebody, which inevitably takes a lot of time and effort. And if it's then still going to be knocked back, it seems pointless. Having that confidence to sort of say, yeah, this is what we think. This is like an original idea. This is an immediate thought. Is that part of that relationship building?
Yeah, because you have times where if there's a bit of feedback you don't agree with, we had something just yesterday or the day before. Like being really like personable about going, I think I totally take what you're saying, but from our perspective, we think this, that, and the other. Do you know what I mean? Because sometimes client feedback and rejection can be like the example I'm thinking of is a bit more of a bigger organization, education based. So, because that like supply chain of, our client will have to go up the ladder and back down and come back to us. Like us being able to say, I think your concern is not really a concern. If you've already got a good relationship going on, there's more chance they'll listen to you and take that advice. You know what I mean? Not that you need to position yourself really as someone that can give good advice that is in the best interest of their project. And we've had other work where let's say we presented a couple of options where the end of the meeting has actually ended really positively, but what they've gone is we actually don't think either of the options are right. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't always have to end really badly. I think it was, the one I'm thinking of was all the preemptive work, the understanding of where we are and who we are. That's right. It's just that the visual delivery of those two options, they're not quite there. And in the end, we came back with a much better route as a result of it.
Yeah, it's just made me think that I seem to remember the agencies that I worked at when I was younger, it was we are right no matter what. So we're the creators. We go off for months in a dark room and create stuff, give you something that you should immediately like. That mentality in the hindsight is obviously so wrong, isn't it? Is that it has to be that relationship where you go and take their opinions and advice. You have to respect that just as much as your own knowledge and how things should be laid out and what fonts go together and all the rest of it from a craft perspective. I think that the industry has shifted so much, hasn't it, in that time? I think it's easy to forget. Like when I started, it was pretty much you just sat in front of a computer on your own. You were given a one-line brief on an email from somebody that you had no idea what they really wanted, but your job was just to try and translate that. And now it feels like we're much more in the business of support as well as creative, and then all the things that come with that afterwards. I think that can help a hell of a lot, can't it? Stopping a rejection is because everybody's on the same page from start to finish. As opposed to, you go off and do your thing, we'll get in touch with you 6 months later, and you should then be really grateful of what we've done. It's now that two-way conversation continuing, isn't it? I know that really returns back to transparency and relationships, but I think that we, as agencies or as freelancers, or even people that work for agencies, I think you sort of all know in multiple roles, aren't we, to sort of harness what the client wants, but bring them along with us, as opposed to just seeing them as a cash cow or the next paycheck. Yeah,
because got to remember it's their business that they are living day in day out, and we're coming in as a consultant. So it's a bit of push pull, isn't it? It's a friend of mine always says, "Oh, an agency should be more like a sort of personal trainer than a friendly auntie or whatever." That there are times when if you think it's best for them and best, that you've got a solution that would be best for them, they should know about it. But at the same time, you've got to be willing to take their advice as well about their business that they know more about than you do. Do you know what I mean? So if somebody's going, this is wrong for reason X, Y, Z, you might need to look at that and go, they're right, actually. Do you know what I mean? So you've got to be humble as well as them. If you can find a bit of balance like that. You always find the best clients are the ones that, you listen to and they listen to you as well. So when there are times when each one wants to push back, they feel like they've got the permission to do that. But yeah, I think it's doesn't always have to be a bad thing, pushback. It's just it can, client rejection, as you put it. It's it doesn't really ever get easier.
And from a personal impact, whether that's you or somebody within the team or people that you've worked with in the past, have you ever seen it get to a point where it starts to really affect people? It could be, I think a lot of us are very low on confidence a lot of the time, always afraid of what people might say about the work. It's a weird thing, isn't it? We put so much out there, but we're also afraid of it being criticised or taken the wrong way. And that can easily, I've had it, I said it earlier, I had it myself, where it's been really detrimental to sort of mental and then physical health. And to the point of just wanting to walk away from it on a number of occasions. Have you ever had that within the agency, and how do you, or personally, or how do you sort of best go about dealing with that?
I mean, hopefully we know, because I'm a little bit more, I suppose you might say, at the helm of our design team, creative team, and because I personally, as a younger designer, I really struggled with it. I'd repeated crises of confidence. So knowing that I'm a bit like that way inclined, probably still a bit guilty of feeling like that at times, that I think now that I'm sort of like at the helm of this little team, is that I try really hard to make sure I suppose the possibility of people feeling really like that is not taken away, but it's like carefully managed, I suppose, is what I'm saying. Is that, like making sure that when work's going well, that, you're actually really sort of emotively passionate about what people are doing, and, you're building them up and things like that. That I think when I was a bit younger, when we were small and we had less of a system for how we all worked as a team, it was more like, it wasn't 3 individuals. It was just like a bit more random. It's like the best way I can put it, really. And there were loads of times when, I was the same. I used to have this thing where I was used to think, oh, like you're supposed to enjoy the process. And I was used to think, I'd like sod the process, can't be asked with that. If I could just see into the future about what the final thing is now, if I can see that now, I could just do it and it'd be done. And I could stop stressing about it and it would just get done. And I just forgot that whole like enjoy the process bit. So it's actually, you could say it's actually easier when the team's a bit bigger than when it's smaller, because it's quite isolating being in quite a small environment, isn't it? Because you've only got yourself to answer to, whereas now there's a few more of us. Like I was encouraged, I mean, actually what we've always, Paul's always been brilliant at this in our team, that what we've always encouraged is that thing of like, when you're not working on a project and you see that someone's doing something and you can kind of go, oh, have you thought about, I was thinking about this last night, and have you thought about that? And hopefully, because we've kind of got a bit of a support network now, there's less of that prevalent in people kind of, going under, if you like, than when we were a bit smaller. I think everyone, it felt a bit more isolating. So it was, pedaling really hard to get a project through at high quality. We felt like much more keen. I felt it much more keenly when we were smaller, I think. Whereas now, hopefully, I'm sure, I don't know, you'd have to ask them lot, but maybe they feel it every day and I'm not seeing it. But I'm pretty sure, because I'm hyper aware of my own, tendency to feel really like, shit, I can't do this. I've like, like I always get that thing where, like musicians get really successful and then they become shit. Like they stop making good albums, and it's like they forget like how to have good ideas. I always think that like every new project, I'm like, when am I going to get that moment where I'm like the musician that makes no more good albums? Is this the one? Is this the one where I just can't come up with any ideas for it? So there's the constant like worry about things like that. But yeah, hopefully not in the team. Definitely personally have. But hopefully that's impacted on, I suppose, the way I'm working with the rest of them. You know what I mean? To try and recognise that, yeah, you can totally feel like that. And I've definitely felt like that. So how can we overcome it?
I think I hit that musician plateau about 15 years ago. It's just gone down ever since. But I think a lot of that, and I've heard a lot of people in different creative sectors talk about this. I think it's when you there's a lot of things about losing your identity where you originally came from. So if you got successful financially, you don't write about the same things anymore. Writing about going around on a BMX is different to having three Rolls Royces. It's that.
Yes, absolutely.
You sort of, and I think that as a studio grows, I mean, you say relatively small. I think 16 people is pretty big compared to what I've been involved in the past.
Yeah.
So I suppose you sort of slightly cocoon yourself in a different environment, don't you, to when you're starting out with three of you, maybe in a bedroom or a small office, and you're grafting.
In a loft room, it was like in an attic space where you were like always cracking your head on because it had like triangular. But yeah, I think because when I say that we're small and it's like 16 people, I reckon that there's loads in our sort of culture and DNA that I think we try and make it feel small, even though 16 is quite a few people now. By which I mean that everybody's sat in the same space and pretty much everybody's involved in all conversations about all projects. And I think that nimbleness of how we've always worked, like I certainly always want that to remain. Because when we go and pitch ourselves to companies, we don't, we make a point of the fact that we have not got a strategy team that've got their own office. And we haven't got an account team that've got their own space. And like we're all together. So that's why that sort of overlap between having creatives at the table really early on is dead important to the way we work. So yeah, maybe that the DNA, the kind of approach has been more small studio than it really is, but I think that can help in loads of ways, really.
Yeah, and I suppose it's also to try and prevent a lot of these things happening or exposing younger members to certain clients' reactions. Is by the sounds of it, you've got a really strong studio culture, which is, and by that I don't mean 3 cups of coffee and 10 minutes. It's about it's well-being, isn't it? It's about people first. It's about exposing people to giving them the equal opportunities. I would have loved to be able to pitch. At the time, I probably would have been petrified as a junior, but just to see into that world, because it does make such a big difference if you feel like you're part of the chain from start to finish, as opposed to sometimes it feels like hearsay, doesn't it? You're just getting
yeah. And everybody hates that. You hear that all the time, like in appraisals and stuff. It's like, I didn't know, I wasn't communicated with. So I think that like our culture is about the work first and foremost. But I suppose I wouldn't say there was like like I say, written down, oh, we're all about well-being and people. But I think that because the studio is so about the work, what I think you find is that there's quite a lot of job satisfaction. Do you know what I mean? Because creative people want to make good work. So if we're all into what we're doing and enjoying it and coming to work day in, day out, and like saying to people like, oh, that project you're on, I found this illustrator, they'd be perfect for it, or I think like, and by not having any churn, what I mean by churn is like projects that you just, because they exist in some agencies that you just sort of do, but no one ever sees. I think that's the culture for me. It's like the work comes first, and if we're all enjoying making that work, we'll all be pretty happy because everybody will be. I think that being in our studio and having that focus on good work, everybody is sort of like in a year. I always think that like everybody in our team ought to have 3, 4, 5 bits of work that they've done in that year that they would put in their portfolio, and then the next year we go again. Do you know what I mean? So I reckon that feels to me like that's what the internal culture's about, is that it's about making the work and being happy making it, and that will make you happy in your work, make you want to come to work day in, day out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that version, even though I think some phrases get, especially in today's world, they get construed a little bit, where to me that would be like the perfect version of well-being, where it's not like a huge banner above the door that says this is the yoga room or the mental health room. What that is you just respecting everybody for equal levels. People are being treated well, people are being involved in things, have got equal opportunities. That's sort of a subconscious well-being, isn't it? That really leads to, hopefully then is reflected on the work and then the clients, and that prevents a lot of rejection, isn't it? That's
well, that's the idea.
Take those steps at the start, don't you, internally, to then broadcast that out externally.
That's the idea, because we also have a thing where we don't really have, like, if people show an interest and really want to grow their work in a certain direction, people have pretty much they're in the driving seat really it's why I got more involved in the kind of like the written side of what we do, because that was what I was interested in. I could see it was a gap in the studio. It was what I was in sort of better at. And so, yeah, like, again, that plays into well-being, doesn't it? Because it means that if you're really interested in digital design, or you're really interested in motion, and that's really where you push your career and your portfolio, that we leave the door open for that and encourage it, really, that, we don't want people to be sort of stuck in a role where they only do one thing if they want to grow out and do something else.
Well, presumably retention must be pretty high then.
It is, yeah. Well, like me, of course, here forever. And then Dan, we got two Dans. One of the Dans has been here for his 10th anniversary this year. And then the other Dan, I think he might be sort of like maybe 6 or 7 years. So yeah, the retention is pretty good. I think that Sheffield probably plays a big part in that as well, because I think that as a city, like, opportunities for designers, there's not a huge amount. You know what I mean? It's not like being in London. It's a pretty small pool. So I think that the city plays a role in that. And like you were saying about Sheffield before, I think as we've got older, Sheffield is a pretty good city, I think, for like the older person, and especially when you're having a family and stuff like that. It's a sort of perfect city for it. So maybe that's got something to do with the retention as well.
And as we're coming towards, I can't believe that's nearly 50 minutes already. Coming towards the end, Lee, I don't know if really you're able to answer this, but I'm thinking more about people that obviously we touched upon, you guys, and the size that you are, and even though this conversation is across the board, it's been quite specific to Peter and Paul, naturally. I'm thinking a lot more, and I know this with my own situation, is working out either alone or in a very small team, and how to face a lot of rejection. I've always found it quite difficult, especially when I first went freelance and then sort of started my own thing, just did my own thing, just as a one-man band. And the sort of the drop of you worry just because you think you've lost a client because they don't like your work, or you think, is that going to get passed on? People you get a reputation for always being the third time guy. You get it right after being directed 3 times. Right, yeah. All those sorts of things which they just play in your head because you've got no one else to bounce bounce ideas off or even talk to. From a red flags perspective, I don't particularly like that phrase, but is there anything that you see in your time in design that you'd say are good to potentially avoid? People that want things yesterday, that old cliche. People that just haven't got a budget. People that are just maybe don't respond very well to emails, or they don't really have much communication skills. Is there anything that you've ever thought we would swerve those sort of type of businesses or clients just because something doesn't seem to sit right?
Yeah, I think that's it. It's a hard one. You could probably do an episode just on that. I'm trying to think of the times when we've met clients where it's not really worked out. I think that's been down to people that you can see don't value the thing that you think you bring. You know what I mean? When you can see that there's a gap between what you do and what they want, I think that's when you'll start to hit a bit of a rocky road, don't you? I think that there are times we've had when we've had clients that have really wanted to play that hierarchy like quite loudly. Do you know what I mean? Where they've wanted to be clearly in a sort of position in the dynamic of the relationship, like they've wanted to have like be a step up on the ladder. They've wanted to have a position where they could give you a bollocking. Do you know, like that kind of thing that I just don't think works, really. I don't think that's the way that we're going to arrive at the most effective good work if we have that hierarchy in place. Of course, they're paying you, you're a supplier, but the more you can get that level, I think that's when you get the best work, really. Yeah. So yeah, there are a couple of red flags. Any more? Don't know. I'm probably missing loads. I'll probably go off the conversation and then think of another 30. But I think like that, like that mismatching culture, that thing when people clearly aren't valuing what you've got to bring. I think you'll always find that there are slight issues in getting work through with anything like that. You really want people to be coming to you, don't you, who that if they don't know your work, that even if you're a freelancer and you're able to go, oh, this is me, this is the work I've made, you want them to have, see the value in that, because that's what you do. If they don't, like, because I always think this thing about, if we work with illustrators, never ever get an illustrator to do what they don't do. Do you know what I mean? Don't tell them to change style just because it's what you want. Go and find the person whose style matches what you need, and just let them do their thing. I think that then you get better work and better relationship out of it. So there you go. There's 2 flags.
Yeah.
Maybe 3, 2.5 flags.
I think for me, the problem is the red flags, they always happen halfway through the commission. So you're sort of like a little bit stuffed either way.
Yeah, it's true, actually, because there's that Pixar book, that Creativity Inc., which is like one of my favorite books about creativity ever. And they've got like this quote in there, which is like, the mistakes are getting made right now. It's just you don't know yet.
Yeah.
You don't discover for another 3 months. So that's very true. Like,
I think that those experiences do then help you. I think a lot of this, I suppose it's the same for all industries, but it seems to be very specific to design or creativity, is that you have to learn through what you've done in the past. You sort of start to pick up traits, don't you? You start to sort of, the way that people communicate, maybe, there seems to be a common trend with people that a little bit can not be very in depth or detailed about what they want. It's always quite vague, and you sort of have a bit of suspicion, or they start to reference sort of things like Fiverr or Canva and all those sorts of type. They can sometimes help you sort of weed out the bad ones. But I think my concern is always for younger people, specifically going out on their own. Again, this is based upon my past. Is that sometimes you just need the work. You're desperate for the work. You just got to try and survive. So you can put yourself into scenarios that can be quite detrimental. Like I said earlier, mentally, or it can be, you start to fall out of love with things. I suppose that's the thing. You've got to have quite a lot of resilience to keep on going and push forward and get to a stage of building something where you then attract the people that you ideally want.
I mean, it might be more, because there's definitely the need, isn't there, to keep the work coming in when you're on your own. I suppose, like, as long as you framed that in your own head, though, do you know what I mean? Like, as long as you framed, this is one of those sorts of pieces of work where it's required, it's not like the be all and end all. And hopefully you can frame it in a way where if there is rejection and things don't go right, then it shouldn't matter so much. The ideal scenario is that you've got something else on the back burner that is what you want to be doing and that can be going well.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. That's been a very, very fast hour. I appreciate your time. It's been nice to sort of dive into something we haven't before. I think it's definitely something that we do again in future, and start to maybe looking at other size studios, or even people just going freelance or starting out. What be interesting to see the different experiences that people have at different stages of their career in design. So I appreciate your time. I thank everybody for tuning in.